Well, hello, everyone. If you don't know me, my name is Liv, like they said. Chances are you have seen me up here hosting before, but I am a senior. I go to Millard West. Nice to meet you if we haven't met. And when the conversation of getting to speak at YU came up, I was super, super excited because, I had the opportunity to do so last year, and then this year, it presents itself again, and I can really learn from what I did last year and grow from that. So just a little disclaimer based on some past feedback that I will not be saying slay throughout any portion of this sermon. So just wanted to put that out there. You don't have to worry about that this year. But like I said, I was super, super excited. So immediately once the planning process started, I really felt like God had placed what I needed to say on my heart. And, I was sharing that at the dinner table with my family. And I was telling my mom, I'm so excited to start talking because I'm going to start by saying how I made show choir like the main event in my life, and I really just made it a god almost. And, then show choir auditions happened, and I didn't make the varsity group, and it broke me. She was like, whoa, I'm going to stop you right there because, you haven't even talked to us about how you feel about show choir auditions, so why would you talk to a whole crowd of people about that? And well, I was a little disappointed that she wasn't fully supportive of my awesome idea. She was right. This time last year, I did not make the varsity show choir at my school, and it broke me. That day, I'm pretty sure I said maybe a total of 4 words to her. Started off with, don't talk to me when the list came out. And then 4 hours later, after crying, I just said, I'm going out with friends. And that was it, because I was so broken about not making varsity. And looking back, I wish I could have told my past self, girl, it was never that serious. But that day, I reached a level of crazy that I'm not very proud of, and I don't want any of you guys to ever have to reach. And the reason me not making varsity was so hard for me was because I had worked so hard for it, okay? I was in voice lessons since 5th grade. I had been in show choir all of middle school, all of high school, and my junior year, I did everything in my power to make sure I was making varsity. And everyone told me that I was going to make varsity. Along with all of this hard work I had dedicated to show choir, I also kind of felt like God owed it to me. A few weeks before the audition, I was so anxious about it that I could not sing through My Country 'Tis of Thee, the classic show choir audition song, without crying, okay? My anxiety was so encapsulating because I was so obsessed with the idea of making varsity. But as the auditions got closer, I had absolutely everyone in my life praying for me, okay? My small group, my grandma, everyone. And I thought, this is pretty perfect, okay? If God's on my side, he doesn't want me to be anxious, and this is causing me a lot of anxiety, so surely he'll let me into varsity, right? He'll use me getting into varsity as this David and Goliath moment. It'll be groundbreaking, and I won't be stressed anymore. That was not the plan. See, the issue is that I had the whole God's plan thing and God's peace thing wrong in my head. Because at the end of the day, the peace we get from God is not assistance in our own plan, but it's assurance in his bigger plan. I know I'm not the only one here tonight who has a lot of anxiety when I try and do God's job for him, because even people way back in 1870 BC did the exact same thing. So today we'll be looking at Exodus 32, which is the story of the golden calf. This is in the Old Testament, meaning that Jesus has not been born yet, but basically there are these people called the Israelites who are living in Egypt, and they're being treated as slaves. And Moses, who we talked about last week, was able to be a servant to God, and God worked through him to do some amazing things and ultimately lead the Israelites out of Egypt. And this is where the stories like parting the Red Sea come in. God really showed them that he is going to lead them to this place called the Promised Land. And they called it the Promised Land because God promised it to them. I know, crazy. But this promised land is this area where they will be safe and they won't be enslaved anymore. And like I said, God literally parted the Red Sea for them. So he's clearly shown that he has power and that he has a plan to fulfill his promise to get this land to them. So now we're at Exodus 32, and the Israelites were traveling, but Moses stopped all of a sudden. And as Moses was talking to God, he was called to talk to him on top of this mountain. And the Israelites don't know what he's doing up on top of this mountain. All they know is, like, if I need to get to the promised land, I probably need to, not spend 40 days talking to God on a mountain, just an idea. But they don't know that that's part of God's plan, and they are anxious. And so they think, Moses isn't super efficient at this point. We've been through a lot. Let's get to the promised land already. And they had a very similar thought to me, where they knew God's power, they knew God's plan, but they were worried that following his plan would come at the expense of their comfort. So they decide that they want to get to their home. Let's find a quicker way to fulfill God's promises just without him. So they take all of their gold items, all their gold jewelry, all of this, and they melt it together, and they make a golden calf. And this golden calf is what they think is going to potentially maybe lead them to the promised land. And if they worship this, maybe they will get the fulfillment of the promised land. And from the perspective of God, I would be pretty upset at this time, because he's done all of these things for these people, and then all of a sudden, his plan doesn't align with theirs, and they say, okay, on to the next. And there's also the perspective of a teenage girl. I'm like, yeah, I would never worship a cow. Like, why did you do that? But at the end of the day, I did worship my own form of golden cow when it came to show choir. See, I knew that God had a bigger plan for me, but I chose to follow my own plan because I was only relying on my own judgment. It was impossible for me to picture a world where I felt fulfillment not on varsity. Just as God promised them freedom and land, he promises us love, forgiveness, acceptance, and eternity with him. And just like the Israelites who said, yeah, I want the promised land, but just not in the form that God is giving it to me, we think, yeah, I want love, acceptance, forgiveness, but just not in the form that God is giving it to me. See, the real root reason I wanted to make the varsity group was because I would have felt more accepted by my family. Maybe I would have gotten a lot of love in the form of praise, and it would have probably given me a little bit more security in my friendships. But at the end of the day, God promises us security in our salvation, and that is so much greater than anything you can put on a college resume. And yes, it's very hard to comprehend how amazing and how much greater this form of acceptance and love is than anything we could have on earth. But that is because we are human, and God recognizes that. I want to bring up one of my very, very favorite verses, which is Proverbs 4, verses 5 through 6. And it reads, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight." I love this verse so much because it reminds us all that the reason that his plan to fulfill his promises to us might not look like our worldly standards is because his world and his standards are so much bigger than ours. Another reason that I love this verse is because it reminds us that God is so much smarter than us, okay? If there's a reason we should trust him, it's because he knows so much more about the plan and about our world than we do. Not only does God have a bigger plan for just your high school career, but he has a greater plan than literally your entire time on earth. So it's great to have little side quests. Trust me, I love to get involved in a few extracurriculars in my community, but at the end of the day, we need to recognize that we are part of God's plan where he saves us from eternal suffering. And that is so much bigger than any smaller plan that we could have. So, to be blunt, it was kind of crazy of me to think that God owed me anything when it came to show choir auditions, especially when he laid down his son's life for me. And it was pretty crazy of me to let such a small part of my plan control my entire life when God has such a greater plan for me. And now I know that it's kind of difficult to just say, follow God's plan, because following God's plan does look a little bit different for every single one of us. But I can give us some tips on what exactly not to do. So, thinking about this verse, I think it's very important that we do not lean on our own understanding when we are talking to God, okay? We need to ask God what he wants our plan to look like before we ask him for assistance in our plan. I fall guilty of this a lot of the time when it comes to test taking, or definitely when it came to those show choir auditions. But we need to make sure that when we are speaking to God, we are asking him for assistance in things that he wants for our lives, rather than the things that we want for our lives. Another way that we can ensure that we are following his plan is by identifying what our plan and our goals are and sacrificing it to him. Now, tonight, I've said a lot of follow God's plan because he knows more than you, and when you give him control, you don't have to be anxious. But I want to remind you guys of one of the most important reasons of why you should not try and make your own path and find validation in different ways. And that is that we are going to exist forever. It's either exist forever in heaven or exist forever in hell. There's no other option, which, cool, didn't sign up for this and did not realize that it was gonna take this long, but the same thing with eternity applies to control. By you not giving God control, that does not mean that you are in control. Currently, Satan has control of the earth. That's why there's sin here. It's not good, but that's the truth. And right now, if you are trying to control your own plan, you don't have control, actually. So when we give God our plan, it may not go the way we want it to, but we do have the facts that it will lead to God's promises. And like I've said before, I know following God's plan is a lot harder than it sounds. No matter how many times I was told or I reminded myself that my own goals and my own values were not as important, it's still a very hard truth to live by because we live in a world that encourages us to strive for things that God doesn't necessarily care for our lives. Nobody ever told me, Liv, I think you care way too much about show choir. It's become an idol in your life. In fact, it was celebrated. On applications, I was able to put so much information down about how much I cared, how much energy I put towards it, everything. My family supported it. I missed YU, I missed church, and no one questioned it because I'm caring about my community, I'm caring about my school. That's a good thing, right? And show choir was a good part of my life until I let it become an idol, until I let it become a god. And at that point, I was dealing with such extreme anxiety because I was putting my salvation and myself in charge of my salvation. So the thing is that we all desire the things that God promises us, but we cannot fulfill these promises because we are not gods. The thing that is so special about God's promises is that we don't have to earn them. And again, that's hard to understand because in our world, we work to earn everything. So surely, if you want love, you have to do everything in your power to make sure that one person likes you. And if you want to feel achievement, you have to do everything to get those good grades. And you'll do everything in your power to make sure you get those perfect grades, and then the gods we build for ourselves cause us such great anxiety because, again, if our salvation was up to us, we'd be screwed. It may not come to a surprise to you guys, but when it comes to the golden calf, the Israelites it did not end up helping them get to the promised land. They had to face the facts and acknowledge that they had such little control over the world they were living in. I mean, if you really think about the golden calf part, it's a little crazy. We can all acknowledge that wasn't going to work. But their whole idea of surely if I'm going to get to God's promises, I have to work for it is something all of us do, and it causes us great anxiety. Now, it's true that no worldly thing will get us closer to God's promises. You may feel accepted, loved, validated, and get attention from someone, a test grade, winning a game, really anything. But we will fail ourselves, and these things will fail us because we are human. Somewhere down the road, they're not going to like you back, you aren't going to get into the activity, and you will fail at something. But God's promises will never fail us. So, how do we avoid the golden calves? How do we avoid worshiping idols and the anxiety that comes with that? First, we need to focus on what we know from God. No, he didn't send us a specific in detail schedule of what his plan for our lives looks like. But we know that even if it's at the very end of our life, God will fulfill his promises to us, just like he did for the Israelites. And another important thing that I think is a super great way to make sure we're not worshiping golden calves is to question how significant the things are that are causing you anxiety. A lot of you have probably heard me say, it was never that serious. And when I say this phrase, it really helps me to remember if the things I am idolizing or the things that are causing me anxiety are actually part of God's plan, or if they are me trying to work to get God's promises. So maybe it's today, maybe it's tomorrow, it could be 4 years down the line, that you need to remember that whatever is causing you anxiety is actually an idol in your life, and that it was never that serious when looking at God's bigger picture. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you I had the opportunity to speak tonight. As we head into small groups, I pray that you are able to identify idols in our lives and that we are able to give them to you, Lord. I thank you that we have this time to share with our friends, and I pray that we can be productive during it. Amen.